Welcome to the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. I am your host, Neil Horwitz. Hit me up on Twitter, NJH287, also on LinkedIn, where you can find more content. The website, dsmsports.net, where you can find lots of content in every episode. And of course, the podcast is available on whichever podcast platform is your favorite. You can check out the full archive going back 11 and a half plus years. Speaking of 11 and a half plus years, my guest on the podcast today was actually on the podcast almost 10 years ago, and he's coming back for a return visit. Back when we spoke originally, he was with British Tennis, the Lawn Tennis Association, the organization that puts on Wimbledon and tries to drive participation in tennis in England. That was an excellent episode. So good, and now he is with SailGP. My guest on the podcast today is Tom Halls. Since over that last almost 10 years, he has led quite an interesting career path, a really cool journey. You're going to hear about his stops along the way at Meta, at Formula E, at Gfinity. Lots of interesting lessons learned, and today he is the SVP of social for SailGP. I've been circling SailGP for a while now, wanting to hear and learn more about their story, how they've grown this upstart league, which is now around 5 years in existence. You're going to hear a little bit about the origins of it and how they differ from the old school sailing, so to speak, that's been around for generations. But SailGP is really developing a fan base. The growth is really impressive. A big part of it is Tom and his team, his peers, his leaders at SailGP. You're going to hear what it's like to truly build a fan base and develop fans in this newer-ish league, and how you get fans to become a fan of a non-traditional sport. Not many of us grew up participating in sailing, let alone watching sailing as well. Just so many good lessons here about segmenting fans, about understanding what drives fan interest, and how to develop fans from the curious to the casual to the diehard, and how you think about allocating resources, looking at different platforms, content strategy, answering difficult and challenging questions. I really enjoyed this episode. I think you will too. So here he is. Listen up to Tom Halls of SailGP. I am back on the podcast with today's guest. I'm so psyched to talk to him. He is just doing awesome stuff with SailGP. My guest on the podcast today is Tom Halls. He is SVP of social for SailGP. Welcome to the podcast today, Tom.
Thanks for having me, Neil. Great to catch up again.
Really psyched to pick your brain. SailGP is doing great stuff, and you just had such an impressive career throughout. Tell us about that career path, about your stops along the way. You've had a lot of interesting places you've been and have left your mark wherever you've been, and now you're doing big things at SailGP. So tell us about your stops and any tips for folks that want to try to do what you do today.
So I am 15 years, maybe closer to 18 years in the industry at this point, which makes me feel old. Um, but sports keeps you young.
Oh yeah.
I have done, at this point, sailing is my fourth sport, perhaps. My career started, or my sports career started in tennis. Spent a couple of years with the Lawn Tennis Association here in the UK. So working with the All England Club around Wimbledon and their Grand Slam, working with talent development, so media training for young players, very much the early stages of social for sports industry as well. So Twitter was a huge thing at the time. Things were really blowing up there. Facebook was still going guns well before, TikTok, maybe Instagram was kind of starting to find its feet. So I spent time there. I then went to Formula E, which it was the second season Formula E had ever had. Absolutely crazy kind of world, fast-paced startup, just getting things done. Like, it was such an exciting experience and such a difference from a governing body. And from there, I got pretty heavily into the esports side of, I ran our esports program at Formula E I was at EA back in, before my sports industry career started. I was at EA for a few years. So I knew gaming and still game-ish when I get time with the kids. So did about a year and a half with Gfinity, setting up new franchises, expanding, business development opportunities in the States for them, scaling unique IP and working with games publishers as well. And then, the big white whale, as it were, came calling. A former colleague of mine and friend Jerry Newman, who's at Paris Saint-Germain now, had said, "Look, we've got a role leading client solutions or partner solutions at Meta. We need someone to come in and help educate our partners, be it that a publisher or an athlete, around how to best use the platform, use the features, and so on. So I headed over there, based out of London, for the best part of 4.5 years. Spent a good amount of time, built multiple teams, global teams, EMEA-based teams, took some incredible opportunities, brought Conor McGregor onto the Instagram platform, did a
Wow.
pretty crazy stunt with Mo Salah, actually, which we can talk about at some point. And then actually just a few months before they went through their first round of layoffs, had kind of got to the point where I felt like I'd done everything that I felt was achievable for me at that point. So moved over to the Football Association to head up digital innovation and driving revenue through digital there. They had some structural changes over the 9 months I was there. So during that period, a former colleague of mine, Melissa Lawson, um, from Meta, she was in New York, I was in London, but we had similar, we were cut from the same cloth. We loved moving quickly. We loved trying new things. And Melissa had been on board as our chief content officer here at SailGP for about a year. And she was like, look, I really want someone that's gonna, accelerate our growth and kind of kick things on. I said, you sure you want me? She was pretty keen. So not a sailing fan, but thought give it a go. And I've been here for the last 14 months now. It's been an absolute roller coaster. I've loved it, much more of a sailing fan than I was now. But it's very akin, like I can see traits of Formula E in its early days.
Yeah.
Perhaps we're more mature in terms of our development, our thinking, our backing. We've got Larry Ellison is a big believer in us. So between Larry and Russell Coutts, our CEO, World America's Cup, Olympic championships, he's done it all. So we've got a really strong backing and we've made some super smart hires. We've brought people over from English rugby, Formula One, New York Knicks, etc. So the team's expanded, quite aggressively over the last 18 months. We're into our fifth season now, and as you catch me, we're 2 weeks off the back of our Sydney race, coming to the US middle of March. So yeah, it's a full year-round calendar, but it's nice. I can always make time for a good chat.
Hell yeah. As you guys have heard, I mean, Tom didn't even give his full CV, his full career journey, even before the LTA. Has had stops and insights everywhere, and I'm not going to give Tom all the credit. I'll give him some credit, but if you look at any reports or numbers, SailGP has just been crushing it on the content and social side and the fan growth side, and it's great to be talking to Tom right now as the league continues to just grow in its fifth season now. But as we get into our discussion, like the fact that you've been at these places where you've had to, in some cases, tennis, yeah, okay, tennis, very well established sport, been around for centuries, or something like that, and then going to a place like Formula E, where it's brand new, Gfinity, where esports was still kind of finding its way and still is today, even to some degree, and now Sales GP. Like, what has been your outlook on how these kind of not new sports necessarily, but emerging sports, emerging leagues can best think about like strategy from a content and fan development, fan engagement perspective? Are you like trying to drive interest as a spectator, interest in participation? Like, and I know like when we talked when you're back at British Tennis, participation was one of the KPIs. So what does it look like now to build this, to create fans of an emerging property, of an emerging sport with those different sort of entry points and areas of interest, and what makes someone a fan ultimately?
That's a great question. And I think that, I mean, the governing body one is pretty simplistic in the sense of it literally was getting more people playing tennis more often. Revenue through ticket sales was a key thing. We were heavily funded through Sport England. There is a funding federation here in the country, but a good portion of that came from the All England Club as well. And if we didn't hit participation numbers, we didn't get that funding. But tennis in this country is kind of a 1 month a year sport. I mean, the weather is generally pretty atrocious here year round. Like there's a reason they build roofs on the courts at Wimbledon. But B, everyone migrates towards tennis courts in that 2 week window in July where, Wimbledon is just such a cultural phenomenon here. So participation was a big thing. And I loved that. Like it was a real pure purpose in what you were doing. And then something like a Formula E or where we are with SailGP, awareness is critical, and the similarities with SailGP and Formula E, because they are very much what I'd call a challenger league or a challenger competition. We're not entrenched in the same red tape and governance necessarily. Like we have a relationship with World Sailing, and we need to be, our tournament needs to be within their checks and balances and so on, in the same way that Formula E are overseen by the FIA, I guess.
Mhm.
But the other than that, if we want to try live streaming on TikTok, and we were to my understanding, I think at the time we were the first sports league to live stream on TikTok in vertical bespoke format, we can go and do that. Like that's a me and my boss Melissa conversation, checking broadcast rights, and bang, we're away. Like we're technology first, we are digital first, social first, in a way that very few governing bodies or established leagues can be. And if you look at what Formula One have done over the years in terms of bringing social into the paddock, in terms of bringing fans closer, more behind the scenes content, access to that. If you look at what the Premier League might be trying to do now with bringing production in-house away from IMG and really control that narrative around, maybe they're shifting tribalism from football teams. You as an Arsenal fan, me as a Chelsea fan, the international fan, a new international fan, it's it's the emotion that resonates with you. It doesn't matter what team you're watching. Like you can be watching Burnley against Leicester and it can be a last minute winner, and it's just the emotion of it that gets to fans. Obviously there are other lures, like a player as well, like an Erling Haaland brings. Like my son is not a football fan, but he knows who Erling Haaland is, he knows who Harry Kane is, because he associates them with content, with personality. So it's been nuanced depending on where I've been. For us with SailGP, eyeballs is a critical metric. I have three KPIs that I'm measured on. One is follower growth,
Mhm.
no surprise there. One is viewership, and that's digital eyeballs across all of our social content, whether that's live stream, replays, highlights, VOD content across all platforms. And then the other one, which we've upweighted along with viewership in the 12 months I've been here, has been engagement.
Mhm.
Like it doesn't matter if we're driving eyeballs on the sport. If people aren't engaging with us, like it's really easy in this day and age. Well, I say it's really easy. We are we're not cash rich. The phrase used to be cash rich, time poor. Like we're not cash rich in this economy. We are time poor and we are time starved. Like we have to make these decisions on where we're spending our time. So hooking someone in that kind of shock and awe way that social can do so well, that's not necessarily a huge problem for us, because all it takes is, a clip of someone going overboard, or the wings snapping, or our USA team have capsized twice in the last 6 months, which has done huge numbers. Um, it's not a problem to get eyeballs on that. And that stuff gets picked up by all of the aggregator accounts, by the sports networks, etc. Like, but how do you get that person to watch four or five like insane SailGP clips and turn them into a fan? That's the problem that I'm most interested in trying to solve over time. And we've got real positive green shoots there. Our following has doubled in the last year. Our engagement has quadrupled, but we need the follower growth to go with that at the same time. The counterpoint that I give our leadership team all the time is we're also in a world where social is saturated. I think, what was it, Meta in January, 2 billion monthly active users. Like we are running out of people on this
Totally.
planet. And we're not in the hyper growth stage. When I was at Meta, it was an arms race between Barca and Real Madrid to get to 100 million followers. And they weren't fussed about the engagement. They just wanted to get to 100 million to
Yeah.
prove that point. The growth, explosive growth, is just not there on Meta platforms anymore. TikTok, perhaps curtailed by the US situation somewhat. We're starting to reach a saturation point on social where, you know, high quality highlights is not going to cut it all the time. The behind the scenes, the authentic nature is there. So And that's where we're in a unique position, I would say, versus, the access we have and the access we give to our fans. No other league is really at the stage where they would be willing to do that. Our teams share data between each other. You can't ever imagine Ferrari and, Red Bull sharing performance data between teams. And it helps us essentially democratize viewership of our sport. We deliberately, make choices in our production quality and what we do to simplify what is a very complicated sport as well.
Hell yeah. Tom, there's like three or four different like big picture things I want to dive into, but I want to touch really quickly on a small point within that, and that is the follower count, follower growth as a proxy for someone who is going from a clip watcher to something akin to a fan, whatever you want to define fan. In this like post algorithmic recommendation world where I might watch 40 SailGP clips, but never click the follow button potentially, but the algorithm just knows and keeps feeding that stuff. Like it, are we at a kind of a crossroads where we still have to, we follower growth is still the best proxy we have for social media, quote unquote fans? Or is there something like, is there another way to look at it, or where are we heading as the idea of follower count being a the best value prop or best value measure of social, I guess, in terms of subscription or fandom, whatever. I'm not articulating the best way, but I think you get the gist of what I'm trying to get at.
100%, yeah. And I think and I try and articulate this to people when, like, coming from the Meta side of things, like Meta's platforms are based off of a follower graph.
Yeah.
In theory, you see the content from people you follow and the interests that you implicitly indicate. Like, you say you like baseball. I have no idea what baseball team that is in the background. Um, but the platform used to serve you that. 70% plus of content on Instagram now is served algorithmically.
Yeah.
It's almost, if you think about the For You page on TikTok, like profile views and follower count on TikTok really don't mean anything when you can have two followers and go viral on TikTok. Like, if the content resonates, and I think that for me, that's the secret sauce with TikTok and what makes them so, so valuable is that algorithm is uncannily good at understanding. Like, I would say to anyone, start a brand new, fresh TikTok account. It's worth doing this just to test it and search for one or two pieces of content that might resonate with you. So we've got a corgi as a dog. If I search corgi just twice or something like that, within 20 minutes, my feed is populated with that. And then it starts learning and it's so, so good. The challenge is I don't ever feel the need to leave that For You page. So why, like, what value prop can you offer me as a creator or a publisher that gets me over the line? TikTok is a platform where it genuinely rewards creators that are providing value. So comedians, musicians, it's a tough place to be for brands. Like, and I think if you look at brands like Duolingo who gamed the system by saying, okay, well, you don't have to have a relationship with Duolingo, you have a relationship with our mascot.
Right.
Like, you have it with a personality, with someone. That's what TikTok, like, it's similar to the early days of Vine, where you've got 6 seconds. You could best be creative in 6 seconds to hook someone's attention. Instagram still absolutely has its place. But again, with Instagram, we used to find 4 to 5 times someone had to see your content before you could kind of push them over the edge. Profile views are much more of a thing there. Like, to grow on TikTok, your content has to be captivating, engaging, and you don't grow based on fame or personality in the same way that you perhaps did do that on Instagram. So I, quite often with our senior leadership team, our follow growth target is still pretty aggressive for this season. But my point to them is, if we're showing an improvement in viewership, if we're showing an improvement in engagement, if our engagement rate, which is super high, continues to retain at that amount, there are other ways to hook people in now with AI. Whether that's, getting smart to how we sign people up top of funnel, at the very purest basis, like email marketing databases, etc. Um, how do we get them? And, we do this, a lot of tools like Greenfly is a great example of a tool that we can utilize. How do we capture UGC? How do we give a different perspective? Because that doesn't feel like branded content. Like, so there's a real opportunity for us to capture people in other ways. You have to work a bit harder, but if you're a fan or you're someone that's going to create content and provide that to a brand, you're pretty damn engaged at that point already before buying a ticket. There's
Totally.
always an end goal in terms of a follow is nice, a comment is nice, but in an ideal world, you're watching the broadcast, you're watching the live stream, you're engaging. Even better if you're buying a ticket or merchandise. But we're 5 years in or 5 seasons in. It takes time and it takes leagues years to grow these pieces. Um, if you look at Kings League, if you look at Ballers League, which is launching here in the UK, like Ballers League for me as a football fan has phenomenal potential. But I would say there is a huge amount of pressure on that working and working well because of where football is in this country. So it varies, but for me, engagement trumps follow. I'd rather take 150,000 engaged fans than 2 million passive kind of just followers. And I will wager a decent amount of money that if you were to look at the vast majority of follow accounts of the big brands, publishers, creators on platform now that have been there for 10, 15 years, there is a rather decently sized stagnant portion of fans. Like I don't think your follow account it doesn't open doors in the same way with sponsors that it used to. I mean, we've just
Totally.
re-upped with Rolex for 10 years, a brand like Rolex, and they are smart. They look beyond follow account, they look at engagement, they look at audience makeup. Sponsors and commercial investors in sports are savvier now than they've ever been. So yeah, it's the world is changing, and I think for the positive on that front.
Of that. No, really astute points in there. And I want to jump off from there and kind of think about what at SailGP certainly, but even any of your stops that you've been, where how you approach a property and what you're looking at when it comes to building out that social strategy, building out that content strategy. And you like with SailGP, you weren't there in day one, but they're still, in growth mode, of course, as any league is, but certainly that more emerging league growth mode. And you look at, okay, we have maybe a base of diehard fans who know the ins and outs, know the sport, maybe sailed themselves, and we have them almost. And you have other like casual fans that might already be aware of you, might check in on you. Then you have the potential casual fans that just are like cool sports highlights. And like, how do you think about the makeup of your audience and where you can most move the needle? What's most important? Where's most important to move the needle? Like, do you want to have more avid, diehard, knowledgeable fans, or is it more important to get those casual fans? And even you mentioned the Rolex partnership. Is it important to make sure that we are developing a fan base sooner rather than later that's attractive to a particular set of partners that we know we want to engage with? Like so much there. And I'm curious, like how you start to think about it.
So I would break our fan base down into like three in the sense of you've got your curious, your casual, and your core. Your curious fan is perhaps what you and me might have been prior to me working here, at least. You know, you see a clip, you're intrigued, you're like, I've not seen that before. Like sailing is, to many people, it is, you know, and the America's Cup has many fine traditions and has many fine qualities, and it serves a purpose for an audience. That's what a lot of people associate sailing with. You know,
Yeah.
that slower paced kind of boat versus boat match racing. It's not chaotic, it's not, or it's not often very chaotic, and it doesn't necessarily have the appeal to a younger audience in the same way. There will always be a younger generation that do appreciate that because of the legacy and the history and so on, but it's not a growth proposition. So we have those kind of casual fans at the very top of the funnel. Oh, sorry, the curious fans. The casual fans we bucket as someone that, okay, maybe they follow us on social, maybe they've subscribed on YouTube, or they've actually watched a longer form piece of content. They may have even given us their email address at some point, probably because we've had a race in or around where they're based. Um, so we're in Portsmouth here in the UK later this year in summer, and there'll be a lot of just casual sports fans people that will love to watch the racing because it's new and it's different and it's unique. There's the people that are there by proximity with location, and it's, well, can you create a sports fan from a non-sports fan, someone that's just happens to live in Portsmouth and they want a nice day out? So we think about what does that fan experience look like? Um, our sport is not predicated on season tickets like so many of these entrenched, football, basketball, NFL, baseball, like it's all, the vast majority of tickets go to season ticket holders a lot of the time. Um, and then there's the core. And the core group will always most likely be our smallest. But those are the die-hard fans that in our YouTube live stream, like we moderate that. We've got loads of expertise in-house. But we've got fans that will, if a new fan to the live stream asks a question, these hardcore fans are answering before we can even get there. And that's where you see this incredible sense of community and knowledge kind of shining through. And our role is to make sure that that isn't gate kept at all, like
Right.
making people feel comfortable in that community. Like I will often say to my team, and my team laughed at me the first few times, and they're like, "Oh, there is a point to this." I'll say, like, explain it to me like I'm five, because I don't come from a sailing background. I'm a sports fan. And I can understand complex sports. Like I love NFL and I love the tactics behind it, but I can see a lot of barriers as to why someone can enjoy NFL because of the complexity of that. Rugby can be the same. Ours is even more challenging. You've got 12 boats on a race course. You're not sure which way they're going to be turning. You don't know who has right of way. It's if you're race side, if you're actually there at the event, you don't have any of the augmented reality graphics that we show on broadcast. So it's a very different proposition. Whereas if you're at a football game, what you see on broadcast, yeah, it's additive,
Right.
but it's not critical. So, and my point always comes back to that core audience will always be there. And our goal is to increase the size of that core audience and, gradually expand each part of that funnel as we go. It's okay if you don't ever come to a race or ever buy merchandise in my eyes. Like you still have a value to us from a pure, like when I talk to our commercial team and our financial team, like I'm probably not their favorite person a lot of the time because I'll say they're not as valuable as someone that buys a ticket or a merchandise, but they are still a fan.
Yeah.
Um, if you look at we have a really strong fan base, an engaged fan base in Mexico and Indonesia. Like we don't have races in those parts of the world at the moment. So, and we don't ship merch to those parts of the world. That doesn't mean they're any less valuable longer term. So we are genuinely trying to break down those barriers. And I think digital and social is a great place where you can offer, like, what's your value proposition to that audience that you know are never going to get to a race and or so on. Like we did that really well at the LTA. Like we looked at digital membership, and there's so many brands now that do good digital membership. But you should, if you get a ticket and you come to an event, you should be made to feel like it's something spectacular and something special. So yeah, those three core audiences are the ones that we look at. There's obviously layers and personas that persist within each of those, but and then I guess the other part to augment to it is if you look at it on a location-based piece, LA, when we come to LA, it will be very LA. Like the vibe there will be very LA. Like we actually have a vibe document for each of our races. Like
Love that.
Portsmouth is going to be like a summer of fun in the UK. Rio, it's all about, the festivities and the energy and the excitement and everything that comes with a fiesta essentially. So we do tailor all of that kind of stuff event to event, which for a global social team is pretty tricky to get that messaging across. And I think if you look at any other league that goes event to event, race to race around the world, trying to ensure you have a global identity whilst locally appealing to the people you're only going to be in market with for a couple of weeks or months, I love that challenge, but
Yeah.
it's tough. It's tough to pivot like that so quickly. Like we go to LA and then we go to San Francisco the weekend after. So we're back to back. Formula One have that same challenge, but they have decades of fan growth and experience and knowledge, and their challenge is very different to ours.
And when you're thinking about like, and I love just the breakdown of the different fan segments that you articulate so well. When you're thinking about the opportunities to use content to drive this, broad fan engagement, are you ultimately looking for that north? Is your North Star something that's going to have crossover appeal to all these different segments? Or are you thinking about, okay, this is for the casual fan, and or this is potential, this is intentionally meant for the core diehard fan, even if it might not reach the casual fan or go over their head if they happen to encounter it. Like, how does that affect how you allocate resources and just the content calendar in general?
I'm grinning because I've had this conversation maybe 4 or 5 times in the last 3 days with my team alone. Like the advantage, we have an incredible social team. Our social lead, Julie's based out of Boston. She's ex-America's Cup. Like, it's got super young, you know, really open, creative thinking team, and we're split slightly differently to most. We have a distribution team essentially within my team, social, and then we have a content production team which sits under Abner, our director of content. So him and I work very closely together. But the difference there is like our team will have, there's a lot of creativity that flows through that team. But and Melissa always, counsels this, and it's worthwhile anyone thinking this. Someone's For You page or someone's Explore page is intimately different to someone else's. Your page will look very different to mine, even though we're both football fans, like it will always look slightly different. So when someone thinks they've got a great idea, what we're trying to do is ensure that that great idea has an audience and it has a fit for it. How do we utilize the fact that so many platforms these days have got A/B testing opportunities, or the ephemeral nature of social is that it's gone and forgotten in 24 hours if it tanks.
Mm.
So we're really, and this is where thankfully we do have the blessing of Russell and Melissa to try stuff. Like we did 4 different variations of a USA capsize clip at Sydney, 4 different variations on
Wow,
TikTok within 5 minutes of each other.
love
If
that.
you go to our profile, you look at it and you think, it's a bit strange. But the reality is, people don't go to profiles on TikTok. It's the For You page and so on. Those 4 different clips, variations of the same clip with different trending audio targeted at different audiences. So one might appeal to Swifties. Everyone's playing off the Kendrick stuff from the Super Bowl. So
Yeah.
obviously something that's got trending audio from Kendrick. You know, I think they garnered 12 million views between the 4 clips.
Wow.
And so you've got that, and then you've got this wonderful thing like the German team almost capsized in Sydney last year. It's insane. Like the boat's 80 degrees, it's about to go. They somehow pulled it back. That did, I think, 14 million views. And this is all organic on TikTok, but those numbers are not indicative of an account that has, I think, 550,000 followers. But it's what we have is we've been given the autonomy to just try and test. And if you read anything in the industry around how Duo have been able to do stuff with the bird and do that, like
Mm.
their approval process is like 2 or 3 people at absolute most. My approval process at some of the places I've been, there's just no way we can turn around reactive content.
Yeah.
If something happens in our races, like I might get in trouble for saying this, but you can keep it in the podcast. We had a ferry go through our starting grid in New Zealand. Like a
Well,
ferry was just going straight through. Like, and fair play, whatever reason, he just kept going. That was our highest viewed clip. It was an insane weekend of racing action. But you've just got this surreal thing where this ferry's like tootling through the middle of these 12 boats doing 80 kilometers an hour. But we have the creative freedom, and our leadership team will go to bat for us on being a little bit edgy. We don't get it right all the time. We've had to pull stuff down. If you've never had to pull stuff down in social, you're not doing it right.
yeah.
And we tread a very thin line. You know, it's been one of those things. But the fact that we have that creative freedom, and I think that's really empowering for the people that work in the team as well. Like, and we were trying to stress this at the weekend. We were like, if you have the capability to go and produce that piece of content, or get in the tools, get in CapCut, get in the Instagram camera thing, and figure out how they work. Like, it's it's your opportunity. And if it doesn't work, if it gets a few thousand views and just tanks, it's gone. It's in the past. Like there's a reason these platforms introduced ephemeral stories or snaps, or all of these bits and pieces. Like it's to try and test new things. The biggest tip, and I won't gatekeep this for anyone that's using Instagram, if you have access to trial reels is literally an A/B testing tool. Like we pump out everything that was big on YouTube Shorts or TikTok, but we never really posted on Instagram. We've been posting it through Instagram trial reels recently. Now we know that our followers aren't going to see it because trial
Right.
reels are shown to non-followers. Huge uplift in follower growth because suddenly you're hitting at the moment. And if my former colleagues, I'm still wearing the jumper here at Instagram,
Yeah.
see this, they're not going to change it, hopefully. It's literally a growth hack to
Totally.
reach a newer, more diverse audience. And people just have to, but to be given the autonomy and the grace to go and do that and to test. I mean, we've been talking about this since you and I spoke a decade ago. Like it's giving social teams that creative freedom and recognizing that what works for senior leadership isn't going to work for the fan base. I mean, we create content based on what we know the platforms want versus what we know we want. And there's sometimes we have to let go of, being super comfortable around some things. But it works. Like Russell does not, I don't think he follows us on TikTok. I don't think he's on TikTok. There's nothing wrong with that. He would probably have kittens if he did see some of the stuff we did on TikTok. But where he sits on Facebook and Instagram, our Facebook and Instagram piece, there is obviously a running brand tone and look and feel to it, but we're more unhinged on TikTok. On Reddit, we poke fun at ourselves and we have fun with fans. Like Instagram, we're jumping into comments a lot more, like the House of Highlights style kind of approach. Like we have an opportunity as a 5-year-old startup, we can steal with pride what has worked for others.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
and I'm not shameful about that. Like, if something's worked for someone else, then why aren't we trying it? So,
Totally.
yeah, that's a rambling response to a question I can't even remember at this point.
Tons of good insight packed in there. I love the growth hacker with Instagram or trial reels. I've heard that as well. And even to take some of your best content all time and just throw it in the trial reels because chances are no one's seen it before and just repurpose that stuff. And yeah, the idea of like TikTok of one account can almost change its face and just throw 4 or 5 different variations of a similar clip and it's almost like by design your follower you don't want all your followers to see the same things and you want like let the algorithm do its work and it's going to find the right audience for that variation or that clip or that content and you just take advantage of that and I want to kind of like dive in a little bit into that aspect of knowing what's going to pop on a given platform and knowing that I mean even within this conversation today like we're talking about viral capsizing clips, or we're talking not too long after the Daytona 500 in NASCAR, where crashes or in NASCAR always do numbers, or even the NHL, the Four Nations tournament. What went viral from the USA Canada game, which did great numbers, was all the fights in the first 9 seconds. And if you talk to the heads and people in charge at NHL, at NASCAR, maybe at SailGP, that they might like say yes, we love seeing stuff go viral, but we wish there was other stuff as well in addition to the fighting and the crashes and the capsizing. So like is it how do you look at those opportunities to say, okay, we know that these clips are going to go viral. Is there a line where you also want to make sure that like do we just want to be the brand that has these viral crashing clips or capsized clips? Like, is there something to okay, we want to go viral in other ways as well? Like again, I'm not articulating the best way, but the idea of like we like in hockey, we want people to yes, the fights are going to go viral, but we want people to actually become fans of the sport too. We don't want to have NASCAR be a sport of full of crashes, to be known for that. So like, how do you think about the opportunity to say yes, lean into the stuff that's going to drive awareness because awareness is a major goal for you and KPI for you, but also make sure they understand that there's competitive sport and interesting stories and you're not and just come for the crashes but stay for everything else too.
Yeah, I mean, the come for the crashes, stay for the personality is a good one. I mean, we learnt this the hard way to an extent. Like our athletes do not have the cut through and exposure at this time that they're more akin to Red Bull athletes. Like people are stunned by what they do. But if you can name me 5 Red Bull athletes,
Right.
it's tough, but you know that they do incredibly cool stuff. So case in point, we had one of our New Zealand team went overboard last year. Like they're all tethered. So if you go overboard, you're falling off the boat, but you're not going to get dragged under or so on. Um, we posted a clip on Instagram. We didn't think anything of it. It did. 40 million views in 24 hours. It hit 105 million views. I was chatting to friends at Instagram. I was like, we've no idea. Well, we did know why it went viral because it was 8 seconds. You're watching, you're waiting to see what happens. When it does happen, you've got so many questions. And the way we parlayed that into follower growth was everyone that asked a question about that video, we tried to address it either in comment format or we went and created explainer content around it. So why did he not fall over the boat? Why was he safe? There's an explainer video on the fact they're all tethered and they have to run with the tether. What was he even doing on the boat in the first place? Like, why did he fall off the side? It just looks like, because the angle, it looked quite a slow turn. Actually, it's pulling 3 Gs at that point. Like the guy, you see him, it almost looks like he passes out. So there's an explainer video on like the G forces these guys are going through and girls, because we have mixed teams, which again is a unique aspect for us. So how do we introduce all these unique elements to our sport, or how do we introduce it to a new fan? So we completely revamped we'd done some explainer content for our broadcast. My point when I joined was if you're watching our broadcast, you're already a fan.
Yeah.
What about if you see one social clip? Where's the content for you to understand? Like, because I did this in my due diligence in applying for the role. I was like, there's no explainer content. There's nothing that dumbs it down for someone like me who is a sports fan, but you're going to have to really break it down. So we did a 101 explainer series, which is like really rudimentary.
Yeah.
Like
I've
it
seen some of
should
that.
explain it to a 5-year-old. The next one's going to be a 201, which is like, okay, well, now you've got some base level. It's almost like a curriculum. It's like we'll engage that. So we've used the viral stuff to as an opportunity to educate and to grow fans from that perspective. It has worked sometimes, it has worked, it hasn't always worked. So, but it is a process. The challenge we have, and like we know within 15 to 20 minutes if something is going to blow up on any of the platforms at this point. We know that on TikTok at this stage, unless it is a trending piece of audio or a crash or an overboard, anything for us at the moment on TikTok, athlete related, like a piece to camera, will not get any cut through. So we've made the conscious decision on TikTok. It's crashes, smashes, drama. Like that's where you go for that kind of stuff. If you want the beauty of it, like the slow-mo foiling shots of our boats going past like the Sydney Harbour Bridge. If you want all of that stuff, Instagram is, I mean, it's basic social content distribution, but we lean into that and we give the team the autonomy to say, we're not just posting that same piece of content across all three platforms. We're going to try it differently, or we'll try a different caption or different audio. Um, and then YouTube, that's where we get into the really gnarly, like technical stuff. Like we changed the foils underneath our boats this season from an L-shaped foil to a T-shaped foil. And some of the questions were great. They were like, well, that seems really dangerous. And the foil sticks out of the boat. And then 2 days after someone asked that question, one of our teams went through one of the marks and literally slashed this mark in half. So you're like, okay, well, there is an element of danger here, let alone the water. Let's educate people on that as well. So that to me is the logical step. But you have to make that explainer content simple enough that fans feel, or casual fans feel, that they can get it. And to me, that comes back to that explain like I'm five principle. It's it's a less it's a more subtle way of doing like the Nickelodeon broadcast of the Super Bowl, like
Right.
how they break it down. Like that, I mean, we're not at that stage where we have the retained audience that we could justify doing something like that. But that's the space where we can play with creators. Like, I'm still looking for my Snoop Martha commentary combo. Like, I can't get Snoop and Martha. Like, I don't have those kind of budgets. But can I do something with a KSI or a Kai Cenat? Like, can we get them to commentate alongside? We've got CJ Perez on our broadcast team. CJ is 22-year-old Hawaiian surfer, professional sailor that like she gets social and she's able to break it down in a way that others don't necessarily appreciate. We pair her with a bigger, more prominent crossover audience celebrity or personality. That to me, I mean, that's what we're trying to get to for LA or San Francisco is like, can we go and try that? And that conversation to even get sign off to try that took 10 seconds with my boss. And she's like, yeah, just go and try it, do it. Like that would have taken me 9 months almost anywhere else. So it's a blessing and a curse because you have to say, okay, well, where do our actual priorities sit? So we don't just get distracted by all the shiny things and the things we could be doing. It's finding a balance with that. And I think that's where with Instagram, with Facebook, with YouTube, we can be very safe in our approach. TikTok for us is really, it's, I mean, we were having conversations because TikTok went dark in the US during our race in Auckland, which was a really interesting proposition to have to deal with.
Yeah.
And we were like, well, we could poke fun at the US fans because they're not going to see this for the next 12 hours. Like we were having those kind of conversations. And I'm not sure many organizations would have that. Um, but it's the freedom to go and do that. I mean, yeah, we do tread the line the vast majority of the time, but like that's my big thing with the team at the moment is like be creative. It's easier to ask for forgiveness as long as we're not like deeply offending someone. Like we can take a risk. It's calculated. It's not a failure if we learn from it. All of the psychological kind of like benefits of it are there.
Totally. No, as you alluded to earlier, if you're not failing with some degree of regularity, you're not taking enough
You're
risks.
not learning. Yeah.
Yeah, taking up risks. I was gonna get into this later, but I don't want to forget. So, because you alluded to it a little bit in that previous response, and that is that the opportunity to grow with a creator strategy, with liaising with whether influencers, creators, celebrities, whatever terminology you want to use, other athletes. Like, what does that look like for SailGP? Like, how do you identify who's best to work with? What makes sense? What's the best way to activate? And how do you balance? And I guess, what does it look like to have not just short-term success, but ensure that that leads to long-term or longer-term success as well?
Yeah. I mean, we got burnt early. I think, the first few seasons, there were a lot of either agencies or somewhat less than stellar types that kind of pitched the creative side to us. I mean, we do not have a fully developed, well-rounded creative strategy at the moment. And like that remains it's the biggest elephant in the room, just kind of lurking over there with me is I need to sit down and actually put pen to paper on that. We do, some pretty standard stuff with like pre-event promotion through influencers in region, um, driving pre-ticket registrations and ticket sales. We've had some big names on site. We had Liam Lawson from the Red Bull Formula One team. His first public appearance as a Red Bull driver was with us in Auckland, which was amazing. And we got collaborations with the Red Bull Racing page, etc. Um, but we've done lots of I would say the influencer part we're pretty good at. Like
Mhm.
we do a really nice event, so it's easy to get people to it. I am from a world at Meta where we had creators and we had influencers. The
Yeah.
two have inherently different value propositions. An influencer, like if I look back to my Formula E days, we had Leonardo DiCaprio as an investor and someone that was on site. Leo's great for Daily Mail views on the website and so on, but he's not going to really help me get any kind of content views or real eyeballs with that.
Yeah.
So I would rather have so this is where we're looking at, okay, well, what creators are big on Twitch, YouTube, Instagram? Like to me, a creator is someone that creates for a living versus an influencer who is someone that is by proxy, they could be famous for a sport they play or something else they do. They don't actually create content in that sense. Content creation is really, it's unique IP. So for me, that's where I want to win moving forward is how do we find, and there's tons of examples of people doing this really well at the moment. I mean, Aston Martin's kind of creator collective program they set up recently. Like I was kicking myself because I'd had that conversation with the TikTok guys 2 months before to the point where I thought Aston had basically stolen the idea. Formula E have got this big, it's more of an influencer program, but they've got these big name celebrities that are driving in their cars and so on. Like it's a marketing piece and it's an awareness piece. They have an awareness challenge and conversion piece the same that we do. They're 5 years along the route. I think that's the challenge they face. And they have an absolute behemoth of a competitor in Formula One.
Mhm.
I wouldn't call America's Cup a competitor for us. Like we're going after very different audiences and we have very different approaches. We look more at the Formula E's, the NASCARs, the kind of live golfs, the challenger tournaments now that are trying to gain that audience share. So, and for me, that's where creators offer you something unique. And I stand by this. Ballers League done properly with the creator structure they have with management. Both they've got influencers, managers, but they have creators involved heavily with it as well. Has the potential to be the fastest growing sports property we've seen perhaps in the last 5 to 10 years if it's done properly.
Yeah.
Because those creators, they have they've picked very cleverly creators that have a very strong crossover audience, a lot of relevancy. Getting that to come over is will be the challenge. We have a pretty exciting deal that gets announced in the next 2 weeks or so. I mean, we have celebrity investors in teams. Like the US team have got, NBA, NFL players. Gary Vaynerchuk's an investor in the NBA in the US team. Lindsey Vonn's on their board, etc. Like, there's big names there. We're looking at, well, how do we work with a creator as a league, or how do we work with, someone that can bring that crossover audience? If you look at what DJ Khaled did for the Ryder Cup, like you'd
Yeah.
never have paired the two of them. And it's done, like, it's brought the Ryder Cup and golf to a whole new audience. I mean, he's hosting his own golf tournament at this stage. So, but I want to make sure that we're giving it the due respect and due diligence. Like, so for this season at least, or for the next 3 or 4 races, we look to engage with creators in market and say, okay, well, look, we can offer you an opportunity to come and create content, and it's a unique proposition. Like, it's not you streaming in your room like Kai Cenat, or it's not a fashion show, etc. This is a one-off kind of event that you're going to get that opportunity to play with. So that to me is the key part. And I'm okay if they create that content on their channel and it doesn't necessarily need to go to us. And I think it's being comfortable with that that's the challenge there. So we will get to that, but come back to me in 6 months and we'll have a fully robust creator strategy for the 2026 season. I want to make sure we do it properly, because you can throw an awful lot of money at this
Always.
and not necessarily get it right. So it's one of the few areas that I'm very wary of, but I saw enough of it over my time at Meta that it's, you know, something I'm very conscious of.
No, you get to use that insight and to take a more thoughtful approach to it for sure. A couple minutes left here with Tom Hall, SVP of Social for SailGP. Tom, I'm trying to like cross things off. Like, okay, I'm not gonna have time to ask this. I'm not gonna have time to ask this. There's so much. This has been so great. But a couple more quick, big picture things. And one is the idea of where how the teams and the athletes, and how you and your position and your team thinks about like their ability to grow the sport and grow awareness and create fans alongside what the league is doing, and how those strategies should or should not be very consistent and cohesive, and also just the aspect of what you're trying to do from a fan development perspective of making sure that is it trying to develop SailGP fans that just like the sport, that like the clips, trying to make sure that fans are bought in and then they have their favorite sailors, or they are bought in, they care who wins or loses. Like, how do you think about that fan composition, and also again in turn how the individual teams and athletes are kind of promoting themselves?
Mm. Well, I think that's where that curious to casual kind of funnel plays in quite nicely. Like, on the curious front, you don't care who's going overboard in those clips. You can't often tell anyway, because it's an onboard camera. There's a lot of water, there's a lot of spray. But it's moving on from that. It's finding out, okay, well, there's a GBR, there's a Great Britain team. So to me, there's a natural affinity to root for there. There's a Canadian team, an American team. Maybe you've got, but there are nationality minimum requirements for each of the teams. Like, they're nationalistic. So Red Bull Italy have come on board, and they're predominantly an Italian team. But Jimmy Spittle, who is their CEO, and Jimmy's a Red Bull athlete for life, he's an Aussie. So, like, you can see how it appeals to an Aussie fan and an Italian fan. Like,
Yeah.
the Kiwis are like pure through and through Kiwis. Like, and sailing is a huge national sport in New Zealand, like, which was a real learning to me. As half my family are Kiwis as well. Like, there's rugby, kind of cricket maybe, and then there's sailing. Like, it's huge. So, like, that team can't walk through Christchurch or through Auckland without kind of getting recognized and mobbed. But anywhere else in the world, they'd be absolutely fine. So that proposition is very different from them. Um, it's the same in the US. Like the US team are big personalities. They're very brash. They've just got the person. They've just got the deal with Tommy Hilfiger over the line. So there's an elegance to what they're trying to do as well. But they haven't had the best results on water, which for an American fan, like they want their team to be winning. Like they
Front
don't
runners.
want to be underdogs, right? Like Americans hate when they're not winning. So there's pressure on them from that angle. It doesn't matter how good their socials are, I mean, the best way to win on social is to win on the pitch, on
Right.
water, on the rink, etc. So that's for us, it's like we use the drama clips to get you in the door. And then we're like, well, you know what? If you're Canadian, there's a Canadian team. And guess what? They had a beaver as a mascot last year and they had a ton of fun with it. This year they've changed ownership. They're a bit more hyper professional. Like they've got beautiful long form YouTube content that they're pulling together and telling a different story. We're very the teams at the moment are not perhaps as well resourced on the social department as they perhaps like to be able to tell different narratives. So the US and Canada, for instance, have got teams that allow them to build out long form content on YouTube. And that's not an area where we would interfere. So we can provide them like we provide deep access to teams. We also allow them to post close to real-time clips, all delivered through Greenfly
Mhm.
like during race weekends, which again, if you were to say to an NFL team, like you can go and post that touchdown now within 30 seconds, they'd be like, really? Don't the league want to do that? But we've become accustomed to doing that because if we can grow the league, then we grow our teams' profiles. If the teams grow their profiles, it grows the league. It's in every team meeting with our teams and our team CEOs. We all benefit from the growth of this league. The Tommy Hilfiger deal with the US grows awareness for the German team, like that there is a German team and so on. When we get, we've got new ownership investors being announced in the next 2 or 3 weeks, next couple of months. Huge, like you know who they are, like, and they're not just athletes, that they are personalities in a world of entertainment that they
Man.
could anywhere in the world they'd be recognized, these people. So how do we leverage them and what they could do for the sport and what they could do for other teams in the league as well? So the teams work really well together to collaborate on this. So Red Bull are a sponsor of the US team. They're a title partner of the Italian team. The two of them are going to be in the Red Bull High Performance Center in Santa Monica before LA. There'll be all kinds of like collaborative content that the two teams are putting out.
Yeah.
Whereas when was the last time you saw a Chelsea and Arsenal collaboration post going out?
Totally.
Just doesn't happen, does it? Because there's that rivalry. We have the rivalry and it can be really spicy, but I think everyone across the league and the teams and leadership at the moment recognizes that we have to grow as one unit. And then, that brings up broadcast rights values, it brings up sponsorship values, it brings up team valuations. Our teams are a team at the moment will cost you $40 million. It's not cheap to get into this game, and it costs you $5 or $6 million a year to run a team. It's not chump change. So but the returns perhaps aren't just not quite there at this very moment. People are investing in the potential and what it could be in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. Like we have some unbelievable plans like that don't get announced and probably aren't going to be announced for another year or so. But we're thinking, we're 5 to 10 years ahead already now in terms of our thinking and strategy. Our head of strategy, Amelia, is brilliant. Like she worked with the All England Club, she worked with rugby, the RFU, England Rugby. Um, there's a lot of really smart people behind the scenes that make it all tick over. So I'm excited for that. Like again, come back at the end of the year and we might be in a different place. I'll have less hair, but it'll be we'll have moved on hopefully.
No, that's fantastic, and I know it's great to have those national based teams. You kind of have like I don't have to ask who I should root for. I know who I should root for. I'm rooting for Team USA, right? Even if we don't win too often. Even the idea of like Red Bull sponsoring multiple teams, like the corporate partners at this point can also see the opportunity. Hell yes, we are invested in the growth of the league. We're not just invested to get our own ROI and sell more, Red Bull apparel, Red Bull drinks, but when the league does better, we get more bang for our buck as partners as well, and they get in on the ground floor. One last thing for you, Tom, I'm still shareable stat, I promise. And that is kind of where you see SailGP. And I like this takes us kind of full circle back to where we started talking about the LTA of how much is participation and just interest in the sport of sailing for someone to want to try it like matter? Is that just more like a side effect? Like, okay, like we know that there's gonna be more interest, maybe more people trying the sport here and there, or is that something that is there an actual like intent or strategy behind? Yes, we want to drive more interest and participation as well.
I mean, we're obviously invested in like the more people that try sailing, the more potential there is. You know, there's a future pipeline for athletes there from our perspective. I mean, we do some stuff. It's worth checking out our socials, like with the Wasps boats, the WAZPZ, and they're tiny little foiling boats that these kids race around before each race. They're doing backflips on these things and so on. Like, but there is an incredible talent pipeline there. We're not measured on it. It's a world sailing thing for participation, but we do work with, local federations, with local yacht clubs, sailing clubs as well. So we try and give back where we can because they are the future of our sport. And, that's where the next generation of SailGP athletes are going to come from. Um, We've got our women's pathway development program as well, which ensures that, that we've got our first female driver in the championship this season, Martina, who is a two-time Olympic gold medalist. So she's not there on gender, she's there on how damn well good she is on the water, like, which is amazing. So there is a real need to, like, we benefit from sailing's growth. Like in China, I think we were speaking to our social agency there this week, and they were saying proliferation of sailing clubs since the Beijing Olympics has 12,000% growth or something like that. So China's interested in it as well. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, as a country, you need a coastline. So there needs to be that appetite. But like when we go to Brazil, and Rio has a strong sailing history with the Olympics. Brazilians love the water. Canada, like the cold, harsh fronts, etc. Like San Francisco, like that's all. There's sailing legacy there. What if we were to take it to Miami, for instance, or some of these other venues around the world just to try something different and so on? Like we're going to places where there's not traditionally like a huge sailing audience. We're in Dubai and we're in Abu Dhabi. Um, they love sailing, but it's a really interesting proposition for us to um, get our teeth into and understand where this next generation of sailors comes from. Because the average age, and we've done a brilliant piece on this in our Racing on the Edge series, which is our kind of like drive to survive, longer form, high production series that's on YouTube, free to watch, and it gives you a sense of there are four or five drivers or CEOs that are. I mean, this always frustrates me. They're over the hill, or they're getting close to being over the hill. They're like mid 30s. And I'm like, Roger Federer was 37. And like, I remember people writing him off, and I'm like, well, I'm 39. I'm obviously not a high performance athlete, but that's not old. Sailing is not necessarily an old man's game anymore or an old female's game. It's, we're getting a lot of young blood, dynamic, diverse young blood that's coming through. So that to me, and that generation are also entrenched in how social works, and they recognize that, social media is a tool and it can amplify them, and it can get them that Rolex sponsorship or ambassadorship longer term. It can get them that sunglass deal. So it's it's a different type of athlete within sailing to what I'm used to from football or tennis, etc. It's probably more akin to tennis, where they're there for the love of the game. Any other thing is a nice benefit. With football, it's entrenched in them so early. Media training happens so early on in their careers. Whereas with sailing and tennis, to an extent, it was still a relatively new piece. Like we had tennis players when I was working at the LTA that were 14, 15, and I remember saying we should do social media training with them. And my boss laughed at me at the time. I was like, no, they could get in trouble if we don't provide them that guidance.
Totally.
There were a number of players that did make the headlines for the wrong reasons over the next few years where we hadn't covered that. So, yeah, it's important that we protect it. It's World Sailing that kind of look after participation numbers, but it's we're quite open. Like it's not the most inclusive sport. It's expensive to get into. There's a lot of barriers in the way of that. We want people to be able to enjoy the experience, and I think to an extent that can sometimes make it the more appealing because you're like, I'm never going to do that. That's why Formula One and motor racing kind of fascinates me. I'm like, I'm never going to be able to do that,
Right.
even remotely get close to it. My little car doesn't do more than, X miles an hour. Like I'm not going to be throwing it around corners, rally cross, etc. Like that's what I think people want, that element of not fantasy, but it's there's an allure to something that is really, really it's hard to do and it's really rare to even get that opportunity to do it as well. I think like with football, with rugby, baseball, etc. Yeah, well, I can go and play that. Like
Right.
motorsports or skydiving or the wingsuits you see on Red Bull athletes. That's something you can just go and try at the weekend. And it's the same with us and with what our athletes do. So, there's probably less than 1,000 people in the world that have been on an F50 boat. So it's a very, very small piece. But we'd like to see more sailors coming through, obviously, because it just gives us that much more broader. It's a narrative. There's stories to be told.
And maybe your old colleagues at Meta are building some great cool VR experiences that SailGP will be able to showcase in the
M-
future.
Maybe we're building them already.
Ooh,
Maybe
baby.
they're halfway there. So
And
there you
then
go.
somewhere out there, there's maybe the Caitlin Clark of SailGP that will just completely catapult you guys into another stratosphere like she did with the WNBA and women's college basketball. So who knows?
That would be something.
Well, Tom, tremendous stuff. We're gonna have some more fun with you in our second win segment. First episode shareable stat coming up right now. Awesome, awesome stuff with Tom Halls, SVP of Social for SailGP. Just so many good insights and information there. I hope you took notes. I certainly did. Tons of good insights and lessons to learn and take away from. Stick around because we're going to have some more fun with Tom with our quick hitting questions. Lots more good stuff there. But first episode's shareable stat. This episode's shareable stat comes from a recent survey put together by Vox Media. They actually did this not too long ago in December 2024. It was a survey of 2,000 U.S. adults. They looked at all sorts of behaviors in and around the social media community, digital space. And the stat I'm going to pull out for the shareable stat is 90%. We've heard this stat pulled up quite a bit in different forms, but essentially 90% of users in this survey consume content on social media but don't do anything else. They don't engage. They don't post. They are straight up lurkers. 90%, 9 out of 10 do nothing. A few will post, a few will comment, but 9 out of 10 do nothing. So, we obsess, we really spend a lot of time thinking about not just what's being said on social media, but even how we are driving engagement. How are we reaching and developing more fans? Thinking that engagement is the be all end all. And yes, it is the best, one of the best measures we have of is this content resonating? Is this doing anything? It certainly sends a signal to the algorithms, but it's not the only thing happening. You are reaching a large portion of your audience. Yes, you can look at that in video views or impressions or even sends, dark sends, of course, as Instagram is starting to prioritize and TikTok has as well, bookmarking, etc. Different ways to engage or interact with content. But at the end of the day, there is a huge, huge audience that is just viewing your content and not doing anything else with it, not engaging. So when you think about really trying to increase and enhance and maximize that engagement rate, there's not necessarily a ceiling there, but there's a certain segment, a certain audience that you are just really not going to get to engage, let alone post about your league or your team or your athletes, whatever it might be that you're looking, your brand in general. So what can you do with that information? Well, think about the different ways that you can think about, drive that sort of quote unquote engagement, different ways that you can have fans move up the funnel, move up the spectrum, get into your properties, and ultimately engage in other ways. Maybe it's not on social media. Maybe it's getting them into an app experience, into own and operate. Maybe it's about stimulating their dark social conversations that, yes, are more difficult to track, no doubt, but it's also about understanding that the 1 out of 10 people that do engage, how do you maximize their action to take in that sort of lurking community, that darker community that they have access to in a more intimate and more direct way. Ultimately, a lot of, think about who you are. Are you the person that sends the text that posts the content on Facebook, on Instagram, wherever, that starts the conversation, that starts the DM message, whatever it might be. How can you also stimulate that audience? So really thinking about a lot to do with how you think about these different audiences and how they engage, how they consume your content, how they become fans of your league, and how they show that, and how you can really do something with that. So again, a lot to think about here. Something that we've heard for a while. We know that ultimately, a very small percentage, maybe 10% of a given user base creates 80-90% of the content, whatever ratio you've seen over the years. It might be even bigger than that or more concentrated than that. But that's just a real shareable stat. It is that 9 out of 10, 90%, according to this survey. Yes, not a huge survey, 2,000 U.S. adults in December 2024, but a decent swath of users that are active on social media, but 90% of them don't do anything. So that's a shareable stat. Think about it, talk about it, ponder it. More importantly, stick around because we're going to have some more fun, hear some good stories, and more insights with Tom Halls of SailGP. Back from this episode of Shareable Stat, and I'm joined once again by Tom Halls. He is SVP of Social for SailGP. Tom, you crushed it in your interview. Are you now ready for some second wind?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Hold on to the sail, hold on to the boat. We don't want you to go overboard. All right, number one for you. Tell me the most impressive part to you of competitive sailing. And I know the answer to this next, the bonus part of this question, but have you done it yourself in any capacity?
I've been on a chase boat doing like 50 or 60 kilometers an hour, and not RF50s though. I don't think I'll ever get that chance, at least when it's out in the water. The most impressive part is if you think about being on a motorbike doing 70 kilometers an hour and how dangerous that is if you fall off, and then translate that to water and put it at 100 kilometers an hour. That's what the boats will get up to. That scares me. And the fact that they can do that and the boats are 2 meters out of the water at that point, like it's seriously impressive. And you have to do that with 11 other boats next to you.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The sheer speed is just remarkable to me. Number two, we talked about a little bit in your past in tennis. So tell me, from your view, what has the sport of tennis and its affiliated competitions, what has the sport of tennis and its competitions done well over the last 10 years since you and I spoke about your time at the LTA, and what do the next 10 years need to look like?
I think they did a wonderful job to play out the narrative with the big four, like the Federer, Murray, Nadal, Djokovic kind of era. I think the challenge they have for the next 10 years is who is the next big four. Like, even as a tennis fan, there's no one that really stands head and shoulders above others for me at the moment. So, like, how do you retain an interest in, because it's such a personality driven sport? Like, if you look at, people love to hate Novak. People loved Federer for the elegance. They love Nadal for the passion. Um, you know, Leighton Hewitt back in the day for the attitude, or Agassi. Like, they need personalities. I think that's their next challenge. Like, coupled with the dual threat of paddle, which I know is not as big in the US. Like, pickleball is tiny anywhere outside the US. Paddle is a real serious threat to tennis everywhere else in the world, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw recently Cristiano Ronaldo live stream the Premier Paddle finals on his YouTube. That's a definitely interesting one to watch there. All right, tell me number three. The platform. I think we might know the answer to the question based on the interview, but maybe not. The platform that's performed the best for SailGP, the social platform, and also the country or countries besides the UK where SailGP has the most dense engagement.
Um, Dollar for dollar, it's a toss up between TikTok and YouTube. Like, our YouTube channel has grown 4 or 5 times, watch time's gone up, like retention is good, revenue direction is good. TikTok just still has that uncanny ability to reach new eyeballs. So I'd say it's a cop out, but I'd say it's a split between those two.
Yeah. And how about the country where you see the most dense
Ah,
engagement?
yeah. New Zealand is good because of the fandom there. New Zealand, US is big. France, Germany, Italy, Brazil, Mexico. Kind of like, we have probably 7 or 8 kind of core markets that we invest in, but they all do really well. So Europe has a strong play in sailing.
Do you guys have to have like localized accounts, and as a result, do you have like one for France? Is that intentional?
We lean on the teams to do that. So in market teams do that, and then if they do content with us, do English captions.
That's helpful.
So,
That's helpful to have
and
them.
we've been using TikTok because you can organically geogate.
Right.
So you can put out that same piece of content with Brazilian Portuguese on. So more of that, please. If Instagram could finally get that over the line, that'd be great.
I like it. All right, moving down the road here. Number four, tell me briefly, where do you see esports headed in the years to come? Is esports going to reach the ceilings that people once were prophesizing?
I think it's already reached the ceiling. I'm going to put it out there as someone that was so entrenched in it. I think the team valuations are massively or were massively overinflated.
Okay.
You are literally at the whim of a publisher. Like if Activision Blizzard decide they're going to pull the license for Call of Duty esports, like, and they're going to pull it away from someone, then you kill an industry overnight. You kill a sport essentially in the world of Call of Duty and so on. I think it has a place, but its place is for marketing the game itself. I'm not I'm not sold on esports in its current state at the moment, I'm afraid.
I think that's a spot on analysis of where it's at right now. Number five, or yeah, number five. Tell me the most memorable activation or initiative from your time with Meta.
Mo Salah. Mo Salah deleted every single one of his Instagram posts, caused a huge amount of panic internally. We thought he'd been hacked. Um, 10 days later, it turned out it was a marketing stunt for DHL,
Oh
and he
God.
came back with one post on DHL. We advised heavily against it. We were like, this is not good for reach. It's going to kill, algorithmic. Didn't matter. But it was definitely the most interesting one. I haven't seen anyone kind of go weirder than that.
Oh wow, the fact that you guys did not know it was coming and didn't know what was behind it, that's just that must have been a very fun day on the in the Meta offices. Number six, tell me the
Yeah.
most memorable, like, excluding any SailGP races, the most memorable sporting event that you've attended.
This one's easy. I saw the last Federer Djokovic final at the All England Club, and I had tickets for me and my mum, and I surprised my mum. I told her we were going on ground passes, and we had nice tickets there. So yeah, just the atmosphere, the crowd. I mean, Djokovic went two sets up, Federer pulled it back, Djokovic won. I was a Djokovic fan. I've always loved Djokovic. So, but I was in the minority on centre court. The
I bet.
centre court wanted Federer. Yeah, just incredible atmosphere. Like, and people that were not tennis fans at the start were like foaming at the mouth by the end. So yeah, just a great way to yeah. And I just don't, it was one of those epics. Like I've never seen an event or a match or game or anything like that.
Hell yeah, that's usually a hard question, but that's an easy answer for you right there. Number
Yeah.
seven, tell me SailGP team. I'm gonna make you pick one, and SailGP athlete whose social we should go check out and why.
I'm going to get run over the coals by the teams for this. They don't like it if I pick any one team out, but at the moment, I am going to say Red Bull Italy
Mhm.
because I like what they're doing on TikTok. They're being a bit fun and a bit quirky, and they recognize the value of the platform. Um, the athlete whose social you should check out, I actually think Pete Burling is a good one. He's our driver with the New Zealand team. He's not your stereotypical what you'd expect to be an athlete to be on social. Um, he's learning his way through the platform. I don't think he'd mind me saying this, like, but he's really making an effort to lean into it and so on as well. So it's quite fun. It's quite quirky. It's quite how like you or me might run our own personal channels. Like there's just strange things on there sometimes, like day in the life. But he obviously has a really interesting life.
Right.
Um, so he's the one that would kind of stick out to me at the moment.
I like it. We'll have to go check them out for sure. Number eight, the food question time. Tell me the best meal to get in London and where to get it.
Um, my team will laugh at me for this because I forced them to go the other day. I don't know if this is a thing in the US. We have a franchise in the UK called Wingstop, which
Yes,
is
yeah,
it's
moving stuff.
chicken wings, chicken tenders. We have only seemingly discovered it in the last few years. So for me, it's a flip up between that and every American when they've been in town has asked me to take them to Dishoom, the Indian restaurant,
Okay.
which I cannot recommend enough. They have 4 or 5 locations in London. It's amazing. It's not the best Indian food you'll get in London, but the experience, the drinks, the cocktail menu is well worth a try. And there's always one nearby. I don't have much knowledge of the independent ones. I don't live in London. I'm south of London. I can tell you all kinds of lovely places around where I am, but no one would ever go there.
I like it. We will take it. And a Wingstop is perfectly fine, and maybe a commentary on British food in general.
Yeah.
All right, number nine. Tell me, you serve a capacity with Ice Hockey UK as well. So tell me, where is the sport at? Where's ice hockey at within the UK? We have the NHL in North America with the US and Canada, but what does ice hockey look like in the UK and Europe in terms of fandom and interest?
So I'll add some context here. I played ice hockey from the age of 8 till 18, like, and played for Southwest England. I played to a decent level before injury. I was never going to be in the NHL, but I played to a decent level. And actually, I went skating with my eldest daughter on Sunday. I've still got it. Like, you don't forget it. So I'm
Right.
quite proud of that. But the work there is very much a passion project. It's a very small team, 4 or 5 people in the entire organization trying to get ice hockey moving forwards in the UK. We only have maybe 10 venues in the UK, really. It's small scale. There's maybe a dozen thousand players at very best in the UK. Um, when the NHL went onto lockdown a few years ago, when they had the league lockout, we had some NHL players come over, and we had to change the rules in the league because our players couldn't deal with being checked by an NHL player. It was causing injuries. Um, the sport within the UK, I think, has a lot of potential. Like it's actually I think it's something like the fifth or sixth most followed spectator sport in the
Wow.
UK. It has an incredible core community, like diehard fans. But weirdly, like if you go to and it's worth listeners should look it up, Guildford Flames. Um, if you're aware of the Calgary Flames, you might notice some similarities. Logos identical. Don't
Yeah.
think anyone. I hope this isn't me teeing the NHL up to come after the UK teams. But the fans turn up in like Calgary Flames shirts, or they turn up in like Minnesota jerseys and stuff, or Toronto jerseys. Like they just love ice hockey. But there's still that tribalism as well. So I think there's lots of opportunity. I think the spectator capacity, the limitation is its biggest challenge. Getting distribution of the content itself, it's all run through teams and they run their own channels, etc. So there's that there. More broadly, I mean, the Four Nations stuff really excited me. Our friends at IMG have been doing a great job with the socials there. I'd love to see a Winter Classic in the UK, in
Oh yeah.
Europe, or an NHL, or I'd love to see the US come here at some point. Um, I think that would be probably the biggest shot in the arm for the sport and that kind of exposure.
There we go. Make it happen,
Yeah.
NHL. Let's do it. All right, Tom, time for you to take over the podcast. Briefly tell us your social media all-star followers. Tell us who they are, what platform they're on, and why they're following.
Oof. So this might be a little bit out there, but I did spend time with her the other day, so I'm gonna put that out there. F1 Tony or Tony Cohen Brown on Instagram. Tony is just, I mean, she has the most incredible tone and delivery of how she talks about business of sports. I was saying this to the team the other day, like she could talk about anything and I'd listen. She's got the most incredible voice, but she gives some of the most eloquent, simple to understand, but there's a level of complexity there, breakdowns of what's happening in the sport of business, in the business of sport rather. So the LVMH deal with Formula One, like she's Formula One first and foremost, but she's been a guest of Rolex's at a few of the SailGP events. We've chatted about doing some work together as well. Like she's brilliant at explaining complex sports and that breakdown. She's well worth a follow if you are remotely interested in Formula One or like me trying to get into Formula One. So yeah, that'd be my shout out for her.
Your recommendation for sure. I've come across you here and there. And how about you, Tom? Where we find you, as well as point us to everywhere we can find SailGP content.
We're at SailGP everywhere,
Mhm.
which is nice and easy. Not on Blue Sky. The account on Blue Sky is not us. We need to sort the handle on there. Um, I think you can just find me on all channels. I think it's normally I am Halsey on Instagram, maybe. Might be 40 in social on TikTok. I don't know. There's a lot of play on the fact I'm too old to be in social. But I don't think so at this point. Who knows?
Hey, it keeps us young, and the sport you're in will keep you young as well. Being on top of everything that's changing and bringing SailGP to the masses and continue to grow. It's been so good to learn from you today, and we wish you the best luck and hope to see you at a race sometime soon.
Pleasure for having. Well, great to chat. Thank you for having me, Neil. Appreciate it.
Just awesome stuff from Tom Halls, SVP of Social for SailGP. Really enjoyed having him come back on the podcast. My goodness, what an awesome interview, full of good information, full of good insight, full of good, pragmatic lessons that you can take away to your job and to make you better at what you do, whatever sport, league, team, brand, business, whatever you are doing, you can learn a lot from that interview with Tom. So really appreciate him, and certainly keep an eye on everything SailGP is doing. They are doing great stuff across social and, of course, on the water as well. If you can make it out to a SailGP race, definitely worthwhile. I hear great things, and I'll be going to check one out myself in the near future as well. But that'll do it for this episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. Thanks again for listening. As always, I'm your host, Neil Horwitz. Hit me up on Twitter, NJH287. Also on LinkedIn, the website, dsmsports.net, and the podcast. I invite you to subscribe, review, do all that good stuff on your preferred podcast platform. Until next time, this is Neil Horwitz signing off for the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast.